Have you ever noticed how people only start calling you cold when you stop letting them burn you? They say you've changed, that you're distant, that you've become someone else. But maybe for the first time, you're becoming you. Why is it that when you begin to protect your peace, they call it punishment? Why does your silence hurt them, unless it once served them? This video is for you, the emotionally exhausted soul who chose distance not out of arrogance, but survival. For those who learned to say no, even when your voice trembled. For those who stopped performing, stopped fixing, stopped apologizing for existing. They called you cold. But maybe you were just healing. You didn't go silent to hurt anyone. You went silent because your soul couldn't scream anymore. Healing doesn't always look poetic. Sometimes it looks like ignoring calls, not responding to messages, saying I'm busy when in truth you're just exhausted from carrying too much for too long. But the world reads silence as betrayal. They call it attitude. They call it cold. Because they only knew how to love you when you were soft, compliant, and always available. You see, people who were comfortable with your self-abandonment will always be threatened by your return to self. Silence, to them, feels like rejection. But to you, it's oxygen. And yet, you feel the weight of their judgment. Their whispers, their accusations, as if your peace is a problem. But here's the truth. Silence isn't absence. It's rebirth. The seed breaks in the dark, not in the sunlight. You smiled when your insides were crumbling. You said, I'm okay, because explaining your pain would only make you feel more exposed. Healing made you seem distant, but before that, you were drowning in proximity. To people who never truly saw you, to roles you played so well, they forgot it was a performance. They loved the version of you that never said no, the version that absorbed their chaos without complaint, the version that broke in silence so they could remain whole. But what happens when you stop performing? They say, you've changed. You're selfish. You don't care anymore. No, you just stopped bleeding for those who never offered a bandage. The truth is, healing often looks like distance to those who only recognized your worth through your willingness to endure. You're not being cold. You're just no longer available to be consumed. And sometimes the most courageous act is taking off the mask and letting the silence speak for itself. You didn't disappear. You returned to the parts of yourself that had been buried beneath years of emotional labor. But they took your withdrawal personally. Because your availability was never a gift to them, it was a given. You were the emotional sponge, the fixer, the one who knew how to comfort everyone except yourself. So when you finally said, I can't anymore, they heard, you don't love me, but you do. You just finally love yourself enough to stop bleeding in the name of loyalty. Withdrawing emotionally is not cruelty. It is clarity. You began to understand the cost of being everyone's lifeline. You realize that just because someone is drowning doesn't mean you must sink with them. In a culture that romanticizes self-sacrifice, choosing yourself looks like betrayal, but it's not. It's remembering that your nervous system wasn't built to be everyone's emergency room. You're not cold. You're clear. You no longer mistake overextension for love. And for the first time, you're not afraid to be misunderstood. The guilt didn't come from doing something wrong. It came from doing something new. From not replying right away. From letting the phone ring. From saying no and not offering an explanation soaked in apology. You weren't used to not being needed, because for so long Being needed felt like being loved. But deep down, you knew it wasn't love. It was dependency dressed as devotion. And when you finally stepped back, you weren't just met with silence. You were met with resentment. That guilt. It's not yours. It's the echo of every moment you were taught that your worth was measured in how much of yourself you gave away. But here's the quiet revolution. You don't owe your peace to anyone. You're allowed to outgrow dynamics that drain you. You're allowed to stop translating your needs into sacrifice. Healing will ask you to disappoint people, to confuse them, to let them tell stories about you that aren't true, and still stay unavailable. Stay unreachable to the roles that were slowly killing you. You are not cruel. You are reclaiming your time, your energy, yourself. Healing isn't a sunrise. It's a storm. There are days you feel strong, clear, certain. And then, without warning, you collapse under the weight of everything you never allowed yourself to feel. That's the war no one sees. They think you're better because you're quieter, because you've stopped explaining, because your eyes don't look as tired. But healing doesn't always show on the outside. Inside, it's chaos, grief, anger. Memories you thought you buried, but now demand your attention like open wounds. And here's the cruel paradox. The moment you begin to protect your soul, you lose the very people who only knew how to love your suffering. So you begin to question yourself. Am I being too harsh? Was I better when I was broken? But listen carefully. The pain isn't a regression. It's integration. You are not relapsing. You are re-entering yourself. And no, it's not graceful. Real healing is ugly, messy. It looks like distance, silence, cancelled plans, broken routines. But in that wreckage, something sacred is happening. You are shedding the self that was built for their comfort, and finally meeting the one who was buried beneath it all. They whisper behind your back now. She's distant. He doesn't care anymore. They changed. But what they really mean is, you stopped being predictable. You stopped being available for dynamics that bled you dry. It's strange how, once you stop tolerating disrespect, they call you difficult. Once you stop over-explaining your boundaries, they call you rude. And once you stop betraying yourself to make others comfortable, they call you cold. But you're not cold. You're clear. Clarity isn't loud. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't beg to be understood. You no longer overfunction to be loved. You no longer rehearse your worth through exhaustion. And yes, that threatens people, especially the ones who benefited from your confusion. There's power in no longer explaining your silence. In walking away without burning bridges, because you now understand. Not everyone deserves a front row seat to your healing. You're not being cruel. You're becoming precise. It was never about being cold. It was about being whole, finally. There comes a moment, quiet, almost unnoticeable, when you no longer crave being understood. You no longer chase closure from the ones who broke you. You no longer dress your silence with guilt. You simply return to yourself. Not the self that was shaped by need, fear, or survival, but the one that always existed beneath the layers, watching, waiting, whispering. This return is sacred. It doesn't come with applause. It comes with solitude. You start to feel safe in your own presence. You stop performing. You stop negotiating your truth. You realize being too much or too cold was never your problem. It was their discomfort with your authenticity. It was their fear of losing control over someone who finally chose themselves. And so you rebuild, slowly, with more silence than sound, with more absence than presence. And in that stillness, you hear something you hadn't heard in years. Your own voice. It doesn't beg. It doesn't apologize. It simply says, I'm home. They called you cold, but you were healing. And now, you're not just healing. You're awake, ready to be misunderstood, ready to be alone if it means you're finally whole, ready to lose what was built on your silence, to gain what is born from your truth. If this resonated with you, I invite you, subscribe, like, comment with one word, clarity, so others know you didn't go cold. You came home. Are you ready to be hated in the name of your peace?